On a cold night, a lonely millionaire sat in his grand, silent mansion, surrounded by everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered. Then came a knock. At his door stood a little girl, her coat worn thin, her hands trembling, clutching an old rag. Her voice was steady yet heartbreakingly simple. "Can I clean your house for a plate of leftovers?" In that moment, two lives, one drowning in silence, the other in hunger, collided in the most unexpected way. What followed wasn't just about food or shelter. It was about the courage of a child, the awakening of a broken heart, and the discovery that love can enter our lives when we least expect it. Stay with us, because this story might just remind you of what it truly means to be human. Subscribe now to Hidden Echo Stories, where every tale carries the power to heal and inspire. Jack Carter's mansion stood like a fortress against the night, a place of marble and glass that gleamed with wealth but pulsed with emptiness. The rooms were pristine, polished to perfection, every picture frame straightened, every vase dusted, every surface spotless. Yet despite the beauty, the house felt hollow. Jack sat at the head of a long dining table set for 12, but only his chair was filled. The meal before him was perfect, crafted with precision by a hired chef, but it carried no warmth. He cut into his food mechanically, fork scraping softly against porcelain, while the antique clock ticked from the sideboard like an echo of time passing too slowly. He chewed without tasting, swallowing without hunger, because meals were no longer nourishment. They were ritual. They were proof that another day had ended and that he had survived it. Years ago, the table had been alive with conversation, laughter, and the light footsteps of his wife moving between rooms. But that was gone, and silence had replaced her voice. The glass panes reflected back an older man, leaner, wearier, with silver at his temples and a face hardened by solitude. Jack had grown accustomed to emptiness, wearing it like a heavy coat, telling himself that peace was found in isolation. But beneath it all, he carried a weariness that even he could not name. The night outside deepened, the air thick with shadows, when a sound broke the pattern of his routine. At first it was faint, so soft he wondered if his imagination was playing tricks on him. Then it came again, 3 sharp knocks against the heavy front door. Jack frowned. No one ever visited at this hour. He had no family nearby, no friends who stopped by, and he liked it that way. Visitors meant disruption, and disruption meant vulnerability. Rising from his chair, he moved through the vast hallway, his footsteps echoing strangely in the silence. When he pulled open the massive door, he expected to see a courier with a misplaced delivery or perhaps a lost neighbor. Instead, there she was. A small girl no more than 7 stood on his doorstep. The night wind curled her messy brown hair across her flushed cheeks. Her coat hung loose on her frame, the cuffs frayed, the buttons mismatched. Her shoes were thin and patched with tape, barely holding together against the cold. In one small hand she gripped a worn cleaning rag. Her dark eyes looked straight at him, steady but not pleading. For a moment Jack simply stared. The sight was so improbable that his mind resisted it. She was out of place in every way, like a fragile figure cut from another world and placed in front of his immaculate home. Finally, his voice emerged, sharp, meant to keep the world at a distance. "Can I help you?" he asked. The girl's answer was quiet, steady, almost rehearsed. "If I clean your house," she said, "can I have a plate of leftovers?" Her words struck him harder than he expected. Not a cry for help, not a desperate plea, but a proposition spoken with dignity, as though she had asked the same thing many times before and learned to expect rejection. Jack's first instinct was to send her away. There were shelters, schools, and neighbors more suited to such requests. He was not the sentimental type, never had been. But then he noticed her hands. The skin was raw from the cold, her knuckles red, her fingers trembling. Still, she stood tall, unflinching, her voice controlled even as her body betrayed her hunger. For reasons he could not explain, something inside him shifted. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was the memory of his own childhood when he had once waited at a window for someone who never returned. Whatever it was, the silence he had lived with for so long suddenly felt dangerous, unsafe, as though her presence had pierced the armor he had built around himself. His words surprised even him. "Just the entry hall," he said gruffly, as though setting boundaries would protect him from what he already felt. The girl gave a single nod, then stepped past him into the house. She wiped her shoes carefully on the mat, moving with the precision of someone used to being judged for every gesture. Without staring at the chandelier or the art-lined walls, she found the closet, located the dustpan and broom, and began to work. Jack stood near the door, folding his arms, unsure of what to do. She moved quickly, scrubbing corners, polishing the mirror, dusting the baseboards. There was no hesitation in her actions, no childish distraction. Every movement was efficient, deliberate, as if she had performed the same tasks countless times before. She worked in silence, pausing only to rub her hands together for warmth. Jack watched, his irritation fading into something else. Shame, perhaps, or a dull ache he had long ignored. Finally, he cleared his throat. "What's your name?" She paused, rag in hand, and looked at him with eyes too old for her small face. "Angela," she replied simply. "You should not be out here alone this late," Jack said, more out of habit than concern, yet his voice carried an unfamiliar edge of unease. Angela shrugged. "It's not far. My mom works late. Sometimes I help and sometimes there's food left." Her tone was matter-of-fact, stripped of drama, as though she had long since learned that complaints made no difference. Jack felt questions rising in his throat. Where was her father? How many doors had she knocked on before his? But each question dissolved before it reached his lips. In the span of 15 minutes, she had polished the entryway until it shone more brightly than when he had moved in. When she finished, she folded her hands in front of her, waiting silently, her dignity intact. Something in him resisted dismissing her empty-handed. He turned toward the kitchen, scraped the remains of his untouched dinner onto a plate, and added an apple and a glass of milk. When he returned, she sat cross-legged on the floor, balancing the plate in her lap. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, stretching the experience as though every mouthful was a gift. When she was halfway through, she wrapped the rest carefully in a napkin and slipped it into her coat pocket. Jack could not take his eyes off her. She looked small against the grandeur of his marble floor, but in that moment she belonged there more than he did. When she finished, she stood, plate in hand, and asked if she could wash it. Against his protests, she carried it to the kitchen, ran the water, and scrubbed the dish until it gleamed. Then from her pocket she pulled a crumpled supermarket flyer. On the back, in uneven handwriting, she had written an address. She placed it quietly on the counter and mumbled, "Just in case I forgot something." Jack accepted the note without thinking, his mind unsettled. She moved to the door, paused, and looked back at him. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said softly. He tried to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Then she slipped into the night, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was different now, no longer a blanket of comfort but a reminder of what was missing. Jack turned to the window and caught his reflection again, but he did not recognize the man staring back. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his loneliness not as safety but as loss. And in the space she had left behind, he realized that the world outside had pressed into his carefully guarded life and left him changed. The following evening, as dusk crept over the estate and the street lamps flickered to life, Jack Carter found himself doing something he had not done in years. He reheated the previous night's dinner, but this time he set 2 places at the long table. The second plate sat waiting across from him, a napkin folded neatly beside it. He felt foolish, almost self-conscious, but a part of him hoped the knock would come again. Perhaps she would not return. Perhaps she had found another door, another meal, someone else's kindness. A rational man would have left it at that. But Jack was not feeling rational. The silence in the mansion had grown heavier since her departure, and though he did not admit it aloud, he wanted to hear her knock once more. As he sat staring at the untouched plate, 3 soft raps echoed from the front door. His pulse quickened. Rising, he crossed the marble floor and opened the door. There stood Angela, her hair pulled back into a messy braid, cheeks red from the cold. The same battered cleaning rag hung from her hand, but her eyes held a glimmer of hope. Without a word, Jack stepped aside. She hesitated, as though gauging whether she truly belonged inside, then wiped her shoes carefully before stepping in. "No cleaning tonight," Jack said, his tone quieter than he intended. "Dinner is ready." Angela blinked, her surprise visible, but she nodded and followed him into the dining room. She climbed into the chair across from him, her legs too short to reach the floor. Jack sat opposite, awkward in his own home, watching as she studied the plate before her. For a while they ate in silence, the clinking of forks and knives filling the cavernous room. Halfway through, Angela wrapped a portion of her meal in a napkin and tucked it into her coat pocket. Jack noticed. "Why do you always save half?" he asked gently. Her dark eyes lifted to his. "For my mom," she said. "She works late and sometimes she misses dinner. I want to make sure she eats." The simplicity of her words struck him. There was pride in her tone, but also worry too deep for a child her age. Jack nodded, not trusting himself to speak further. The quiet was broken when Victor, Jack's longtime housekeeper, entered the dining room. His steps faltered as his eyes landed on Angela at the table. "What is this?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. "She is a guest," Jack replied quickly. "She helped out yesterday." Victor frowned, his expression hardening. "Strays bring trouble, sir. You cannot save everyone." Angela straightened in her chair, her dignity unshaken. "I am not trouble, sir. I just needed dinner." Something in her calm, steady response silenced Victor. He muttered under his breath and retreated to the kitchen. Jack felt a sudden protectiveness toward the girl, a feeling he had not known in years. After the meal, Angela insisted on washing her plate, finding the sink without needing direction. Jack watched, torn between curiosity and a sense of responsibility he did not fully understand. Before leaving, she reached into her pocket and handed him a piece of paper. This time it was not an address, but a crayon drawing. A stick figure man in a suit standing beside a small girl with untamed hair. Jack's chest tightened as he pinned it to the refrigerator. The image, simple as it was, lingered with him long after she slipped back into the night. The days that followed blurred, but Angela's presence remained etched in his thoughts. At work, he found himself distracted during meetings, staring at spreadsheets without absorbing the numbers. His staff whispered about his impatience, his clipped tone. He ended calls early, walked past conversations without acknowledgement. The memory of Angela saving food for her mother replayed in his mind, challenging everything he thought he knew about resilience and need. He drove one evening to the address she had left him. The apartment building was old, its brick faded and cracked, fire escapes rattling in the wind. Inside, the narrow hall smelled faintly of mildew and cleaning chemicals. The carpet was worn, the lights flickered weakly. He knocked on the door marked 3B, his hand tightening as he waited. Angela answered almost instantly, laundry basket in her arms. Surprise flickered across her face, then she smiled politely. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she said softly. She stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small, cluttered, but lived in. Drawings taped to the walls, mismatched furniture, a tabby cat stretched in the only patch of sunlight. Jack felt strangely out of place in his tailored suit, his polished shoes against the threadbare carpet. Angela carried the laundry across the room with a determination that made him hesitate to offer help. Moments later, the door opened again. A woman entered, her uniform shirt stained from a long shift, her face shadowed with exhaustion. She froze at the sight of Jack. "Angela, who is this?" she asked sharply. Angela stepped forward quickly, her voice rehearsed. "This is Mr. Carter. He let me clean for dinner and I brought you some." She handed over a wrapped portion of food. The woman's eyes softened briefly before pride and suspicion returned. "We manage," she said. But Jack noticed the way her shoulders sagged when she thought he was not looking, the way her eyes flickered to the leaking pipe under the sink. He crouched without thinking, tightening the clamp and stopping the drip. The repair was clumsy but sturdy enough to ease her tension. For the first time, Maria Reed, Angela's mother, looked at him with something beyond suspicion. That evening, The three of them shared the leftovers at a small table crowded with chipped dishes. Angela divided the food carefully, ensuring her mother received the best pieces. Jack felt oddly exposed, his expensive watch and pressed shirt clashing against the simple warmth of their home. For the first time in years, he envied what others had: closeness, love, even in hardship. When it was time to leave, Angela walked him to the door. "Thank you for helping," she said softly. "Most people do not." Jack wanted to answer, but words failed him. All he managed was a nod before stepping into the dim hallway. As he walked back to his car, the smell of damp carpet clung to him, but so did something else: the memory of belonging, however brief. That night in his mansion, Jack passed the grand piano he had not touched since his wife's death. For reasons he could not explain, he sat on the bench and pressed a single key. The note echoed, low and unresolved, through the halls. He closed the lid gently, hands trembling in his lap, haunted not by silence but by the warmth of a little girl and her weary mother. For the first time in years, the quiet did not comfort him. It unsettled him. The rain came heavy that night, sweeping the city in sheets of silver. Inside the glass walls of his office, Jack Carter tried to focus on the documents before him, but the storm's relentless voice filled every corner of the room. The mansion, usually silent in a way that comforted him, now felt oppressive. His thoughts drifted again to Angela. He remembered her quiet dignity, her steady eyes, her small hands saving food for her mother. That image refused to leave him, and the emptiness of his routine seemed more unbearable than ever. Then he heard it, faint at first, then clearer. A tapping at the back door. Jack frowned, setting aside his papers. He walked down the hall, the storm growing louder with every step. When he opened the door, a small figure stood on the porch, drenched and shivering. It was Angela, clutching her schoolbooks to her chest. Her coat was soaked through, her hair plastered to her forehead. She looked up, her voice trembling. "I waited for my mom. She did not come. The apartment was locked. I got scared." Jack's heart twisted. Without hesitation, he pulled her inside, removed her wet coat and wrapped her in a thick wool blanket. She looked so small against the wide sofa, her eyes following the storm outside as though calculating how long she would have to stay. Jack tried speaking about school, about her books, but her answers were clipped, cautious, her gaze wandering everywhere but his face. Finally, he retreated to the kitchen, searching cupboards until he found cocoa mix. The act felt clumsy, almost foreign, but he remembered how his late wife used to make cocoa for children in the neighborhood, filling the kitchen with warmth and laughter. He poured the steaming drink into a mug, adding too many marshmallows, and brought it back to Angela. She accepted it with both hands, whispering a soft thank you. For the first time, Jack saw her relax, her posture softening as she sipped. The blanket swallowed her frame, and a rare giggle slipped out when he offered her one of his sweaters, the sleeves hanging far past her fingers. That sound, small and bright, filled the house in a way silence never could. The door opened again and Victor stepped in, rain dripping from his coat. He froze at the sight of Angela in Jack's sweater, cocoa in her hands. His eyebrows rose, but before he could speak, Jack shook his head, a silent request for patience. Victor glanced between them, then sighed. "Storm's a rough one," he muttered, setting down his umbrella. His voice softened when he looked at Angela's pink cheeks and drying hair. "We might as well make pancakes." Angela's face lit up. "I love pancakes." She looked at Jack, seeking permission. He nodded, and something in his chest shifted, unfamiliar but welcome. In the kitchen, Victor showed her how to whisk batter, how to sprinkle cinnamon, how to flip pancakes without breaking them. Jack stood in the doorway, watching as her shy laughter grew into something freer, brighter. When they sat together at the counter, eating stacks of golden pancakes, Jack realized that the house no longer felt like a fortress. For the first time, it felt like a home. Later, when Angela grew drowsy, Jack prepared the guest room. He placed a flashlight on the nightstand, awkward in his attempt to provide comfort. She smiled, tucking it under her pillow. Victor left a small bowl of sliced apples beside the bed, grumbling that children needed snacks. Jack lingered in the hallway long after her breathing steadied, listening to the sound of life filling his mansion. For years he had sought silence, but now he stayed awake to hear the soft rhythm of another presence. Morning came with light pouring into the kitchen. Angela sat at the table beside Victor, eating pancakes again, laughter spilling like music. Jack pretended to check his phone, though he was memorizing the sound. Yet outside, the world was not blind. Neighbors whispered, frowns forming behind blinds. Rumors spread through streets and schools, and soon Maria was summoned to meetings, questioned by principals and officials who claimed to be concerned. The whispers reached Jack's workplace too, where the board warned him that his reputation, and by extension the company, was at risk. Maria's voice shook when she called him. "I cannot lose her. I cannot afford to move again." Jack listened, anger burning quietly. "You will not lose her," he promised. That night, determined, Jack invited Maria and Angela to dinner. He cooked clumsily, burning onions and spilling flour, but Angela laughed as she tossed the salad, Maria's tired eyes softening as she watched her daughter enjoy herself. For the first time in years, Jack felt proud of something imperfect. When he served the uneven cake he had baked for Angela's birthday days later, she hugged him tightly, whispering that it was the best birthday she had ever had. Maria wept quietly, telling him no one had ever tried so hard for them. But the outside world grew louder. Photographs appeared in tabloids, headlines twisted their story into scandal. The board of directors confronted Jack with an ultimatum: cut ties with Angela and her mother or resign. For the first time in his life, the decision was simple. He stood in the boardroom, the weight of their gazes upon him, and said, "Money means nothing without love. A company without kindness is already bankrupt. I choose them." He removed his badge and walked out. The news spread quickly, some mocking, others calling him a fool. Yet messages of support arrived too, from strangers who understood. Jack realized that the cost of kindness was never too high. Spring came to the Carter mansion, and with it, a new life. The garden bloomed, the house filled with laughter, Maria's voice, Angela's footsteps, Victor's booming laughter. Jack wandered through rooms that once echoed with emptiness and now hummed with warmth. Neighbors came to share meals, children played in the garden, and the mansion no longer stood as a monument to isolation, but as a beacon of second chances. One afternoon, Angela handed him a crayon drawing. 4 figures stood smiling in front of the house: Jack, Maria, Angela, and Victor. Above them, the windows glowed with light and flowers filled the garden. "It is our family," she whispered shyly. Jack felt tears sting his eyes as he pinned it to the refrigerator. That night, as dusk painted the sky gold, Jack raised a glass at the table crowded with plates and laughter. "To new families," he said quietly. Angela clinked her mug against his. "To never being alone again." Maria reached for his hand, whispering that he had saved them, but Jack shook his head. "No, you saved me." Later, when the house had quieted, Jack walked past the window, watching neighbors wave as they returned home. He paused by the fridge, running his fingers over Angela's drawing. His heart was full, his solitude gone. For the first time, he knew he had everything he had ever wanted, not in wealth or titles, but in love's messy, stubborn grace. There are stories that entertain, stories that pass through us like shadows, and then there are stories that linger, carving their place deep within our hearts. This is one of those stories. A man who had everything yet felt nothing. A child who had almost nothing yet carried within her a wealth of courage, dignity, and hope. Together, their paths collided in the most ordinary yet extraordinary way. A knock on a door, a single request for leftovers, and a choice that changed everything. Jack Carter's life had been built on glass, marble, and walls meant to keep the world out. But it only took one small voice, trembling yet steady, to break through that silence. Angela came not asking for pity, but offering her own strength, teaching him that the truest riches are not found in bank accounts or corporate titles. They are found in the warmth of a shared meal, the laughter that fills a quiet room, and the small, stubborn acts of love that bind people together. Maria, exhausted yet unwavering, reminded us that sacrifice is not weakness, but love in its purest form. Victor, gruff yet kind, showed that family is sometimes found in the least expected places. And Jack, the lonely millionaire, discovered that redemption does not come from power, but from opening your heart to those who need it most. This story is more than a tale of a little girl and a man who rediscovered his humanity. It is a reminder that kindness has the power to ripple outward, to change lives, to soften even the hardest hearts. It challenges us to ask ourselves, when the knock comes at our door, how will we respond? Will we turn away, or will we let love in? If this story moved you, if it stirred something quiet but undeniable inside you, then you belong here with us. Because at Hidden Echo Stories, we believe the world is healed one story at a time. We share tales of resilience, second chances, and the beauty hidden in life's smallest moments. So let this not be the end, but the beginning. Subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories and join us as we journey through more voices that deserve to be heard, more hearts that deserve to be seen, and more reminders that hope still exists. The next story we tell might just be the one your heart has been waiting for.